I wanted to thank Michelle and Christine as well for a very good written presentation, and thank Councilmember Schneer for all of his questions as we try to break this down. I sort of want to frame it, even though I know we're now in the middle of the hearing, as I think about this issue. Obviously, we have a tremendous amount of need and not enough resource, not enough money to be able to provide the local match for all the projects that are outstanding. Christine Weikert laid it out a moment ago. I mean, it's the 94 million projects that are, quote, have some form of state or federal funding. And then there's a whole other tranche of projects that don't yet have any of that funding. And so where are we going to get the local match? I think we have to try to answer that question. If not today, then at least over time. I know that when Measure U passed back in 2018, BC, before COVID, we kind of forget, that period of time, there was great anticipation. In fact, the intent of the city council to issue an affordable housing bond. We got right up to the starting line. In fact, the council approved an affordable housing trust framework on January the 20th, 2020, that laid out how we would spend the proceeds of a $100 million trust fund. And then, of course, a month later or so, month and a half later, COVID hit and the world changed. And now we are back in the PC post-COVID era, I hope. And our economy is recovering, and yet there are headwinds, right? Inflation and everything else. And we know that $5 million of debt service a year would have gotten us about $100 million 2 years ago. And that $5 million debt service a year now, given interest rates, will get us less than $70 million a year. And so that is a real problem. And yet, I do want to put a challenge to my city and my colleagues that maybe cannot be answered today, but needs to be answered soon. Measure U is now up to $65 million a year, the second half. I talked and will talk tonight during our budget hearing about how, yes, together we have changed the arc of the city around what is now considered a core priority. We put hundreds of millions of dollars into the inclusive economy, including at least $50 million into one-time funding for an affordable housing trust fund. And that's good. But why can't we make the headroom to do a bond or some sort of permanent funding source down the line here that allows us to have a larger source of local match so that we can run down this list and we can get these projects funded? The need is tremendous. The need is there. And so I don't want to give up on that, even if we cannot get that done right now because of the problematic interest rates and the fact that we just don't get enough for the debt repayment. But then there's a second issue, and it relates to what I call this issue of housing innovation, because I went back and looked at the January 28th, 2020 City Council report, in which the council voted, I believe unanimously, to say that we were going to set aside at least 30% of the money for low-cost, streamlined, smaller units and a cap on the gap financing provided of $100,000 total public subsidy per unit. And this is where the organization of the city and SHRA comes into play here, because the way that I thought we were at least discussing it, even if we never formally approved it, is that SHRA would appropriately and always be the lead on multifamily housing projects because they are beyond the experts. They do a fantastic job bringing home the projects. And on the city side, of course, we have an Office of Economic Development and Danielle Foster, our housing manager, that was going to be more or less in charge of, call it housing innovation, efficiency housing, and those sorts of products. I think we need to either figure out a way to really, and there is a lot of collaboration, there's nothing negative here, but to really figure out how we incorporate that kind of innovation into the list that Christine Weichert presented a few minutes ago so that we can make decisions. I mean, we made the decision with SHRA, for example, to invest in tiny homes with the Grove. We agreed to an additional $6 million for Capitol Park Hotel a couple of moments ago. I tell you what's next on my list, based upon a bang for the buck. I have a letter here from Lennar Homes. We've been talking to them. Danielle Foster and I and others have been talking to them, my Vang, for now almost 2 years. They are offering to build free of charge 125 units affordable housing project with modular housing quality, with bathrooms and kitchens. And what they want from us is $2.5 million. That's the amount we have in our current trust fund, or at least the city side of the trust fund. I would like to ask that a resolution be brought back immediately, putting that funding to this project. Because I think it's kind of where Jay Chenier was going a few moments ago, is asking the question, all right, given that we have limited resources, and until we're able to perfect a bond or do something more, how are we going to both finish as many of the projects that already have state or federal funding as we can, at the same time get more housing for fewer public dollars? And the Lennar project is a great example of where a private developer, major builder, wants to use Sacramento as a demonstration. And I know that we now have a site, which we're not going to announce today because the negotiation on that still is ongoing, but I'd like to see that as a top priority, and more low-cost options being brought back. We've gone back and forth on this statewide JPA issue around the city being able to give up small increments of their property tax over 15 years in order to have a developer to commit to low to moderate income housing. I know it doesn't work in some parts of the city, but it has to work where rents are high. And those are things we ought to grab onto without hesitation, because it gives us more stock without having to come up with the $94 million that we frankly don't have. So two things. One is that we cannot give up on finding a permanent funding source. And two, I believe that we have to make sure that on our list provided by SHRA, the city's economic development department, the city treasurer, the city manager, all of us together, that we are not passing over those projects which will get us, in this case with Lennar, 125 units for $2.5 million. That's what I wanted to say to start. So thank you.